go walk you through something called the conversational case. It's based on a handout that you can get over at Tamsen, that's me, togo.com. And from here, what we're going to do today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through this worksheet. If you don't have it right yet, don't worry. I'm going to stall a little bit so you can go grab it. But I'm also going to walk right through it. So if you've got a pen, paper handy, or if you've got a window open on a desktop for taking notes, I'm going to walk you through what all the prompt text is. And then after I do that, I'm going to give you an example. Then we're going to work through what it would sound like using a live example for yourself. So you can start to feel it out on your own as we go. All with the goal of making sure that whenever you go to start to create content, you've got a great, strong place to start from, and one that you are very confident is going to not only connect with your audience, but drive them to the action that you're looking for. So let's talk through what this worksheet actually says on it. All right, so it starts with this blank where it says, when I speak with, then it moves on to, they often want to know. And they want to know that so they can. When looking for that answer, they often focus more than on, yet we can agree it's true. That's why our answer is. And not only does that achieve the goal, it also, here's how, and then these last couple are optional, but here's the last one. So would you consider or would you be open to? So the way I want you to think about this and those pieces, and again, I'm going to walk through next with an example so you can see, or not just what the prompt is, but how it actually sounds when you fill it out. The whole point of this is to help you think ahead of time. What is A, the message I'm trying to get out there? And B, what are all the pieces of information that are going to need to be in there for my audience to understand, accept, agree with, and ultimately act on this information? So let me show you how it works and what it sounds like using a B2B client of mine, a company called You're Sure that's here in the Boston area. And this was the before. So this was kind of the before answer of how they would explain or answer the question. So You're Sure, what do you do? Or what's your big idea that you're trying to get out there? They would say something like, we make patient-friendly diagnostics that measure and improve adherence to medications. I mean, not bad, right? I mean, you may not care based on what it sounds like there. You may not even fully understand what all of that means. But you're like, okay, you answered my question. I heard the words coming out of your mouth, or I read the words going on the screen. But after using this structure, this framework that we're talking about, we were able to change that high-level message that they're getting out there to something a little bit more like this. That at You're Sure, we help people stay on critical medications longer through simple tests that turn the effects they can't feel into results they can see. So we help people stay on critical medications longer through simple tests that turn effects people can't feel into results they can see. Now, I hope you can feel the difference between that and we make patient-friendly diagnostics that measure and improve adherence to medications. So some things you might notice are, first, we're leading with what a high-level outcome would be. So rather than kind of put it at the back, improve adherence to medications, we're leading with something that most people would probably care about, how to keep people on critical medications longer. You'll also notice that we took away a lot of the jargon and expert language and put it into the language of someone who wasn't as familiar with what we're talking about. And that solves one of the biggest things that gets in the way of all of your marketing, is forgetting your native human language and speaking only the language of either your company or marketing or an expert in general. So let's talk about how, once they say that, how would they use the conversational case to explain what that means? Because you might see this and go, all right, Tamsen, that's fine. Now I understand it. Maybe you think it's better, but what does that actually mean? Well, that's where this worksheet comes in, because after that, they could say, so here's what we're talking about. When we speak with, and follow along in your worksheet, partners and providers, they often want to know, well, how is it that we can keep people on critical medications longer so that we can produce better patient outcomes? When looking for that answer, they often focus on what patients recall more than on what tests reveal. I'll talk about it later. There's good reason for that. But we can agree it's true that seeing is believing. And that's why at You're Sure, we make the invisible visible instantly. And so that only answers the question. It also empowers patients and providers. Here's how we do that through simple urine tests. So would you consider a demo or a pilot? So I think you can see now how that works, where it's starting with a summary of the message. You can follow on and go into a deeper version of the message. Could you reverse this? Absolutely. Do you always have to use this framework just as it is? No. This is very much just a way to think through what your message is going to be. And based on the research that I've done, the most powerful elements that you can include in that message, whether it's a short piece of content, a long piece of content, or the framework for your whole marketing campaign or plan. So what I want to do now is I want to walk through this step by step, using and explaining why each of those pieces is there and how you can fill it in for yourself on your own. So let's start right up at the beginning. So the first blank is when I speak with. So if you're thinking about, okay, how could I fill this out and create this message for my audience and my content? What you're going to fill that in with is your answer to the question of who are they? In other words, who's your audience? As an example, with You're Sure, we said they're talking with partners and providers. So for you, though, it can be, who is it that is reading this? So it could be your prospective clients. It could be your prospective customers at a certain stage of the decision journey. It could be your partners. It could be investors. But you want to identify who these people are. Now, are you always going to include that when you're writing a piece of content? You're going to start every piece of content like, well, when I write and market to people like you? Not necessarily, but it can be a helpful thing to make sure that you're anchoring the message for a specific audience, and B, that in certain circumstances, it can be really helpful for an audience to hear that you have talked to other people like them. It immediately establishes credibility. You're like, oh, yeah. This person, this company knows people like me, which is an important kind of inclusion piece that humans respond very well to. And building on that, when you identify a group of people like that, and you have an opportunity to include that in your message, it oftentimes can make people feel like they are a part of a group that they want to be a part of. So they're much more likely to go, oh, all right, this person knows what they're talking about, or this company knows what they're talking about. And yeah, I'm part of that group. So now what do you have to say? That leads us to the next blank and the next piece of the message that you always want to think about, if not include in your content and what you put out there for your marketing in general. They often want to know. Now, this is a simple, short little phrase, but it carries a lot of weight in it. Now, obviously, what you're trying to answer here is, what do they want to know? But I want you to think about this in the terms of, what is a current question that your audience that you're writing this to or speaking this to is asking for themselves and hasn't yet found the answer to. So I'm going to say that again. It's a current question that they're asking to themselves and ideally out loud to other people, but they haven't found the answer to yet. Now, as an example, just to bring you back to my example for You're Sure, that was, how can we keep people on critical medications longer? Notice it's not, so what is the benefit of urine tests to do X, Y, and Z? Because that's actually not the question that the vast majority of their audience, those partners and providers, is asking. So this is the test for you as well, is to make sure that that question that you're choosing is something that is active and current, and something that people want to know the answer to, but don't have yet. Now, a note here, sometimes, and this is very common with marketers, we want everything to be differentiated, and we want to kind of come out of the gate with something that's, a question that's unexpected or whatever. This is not the place for that. You may not be excited by this question, but I guarantee you that your audience, if they have this question and they haven't answered it for themselves yet, they are going to be incredibly excited to hear that you might have an answer. So it's important to kind of find that middle ground. And this is something I work with my clients on, but find that middle ground between something that is so far out of what they're asking right now that they have no idea what it is, because contrary to what we might believe, that is not going to inspire them to explore further. That's just not how curiosity works. That's not what research says we do. If we don't know what something is and we don't know why it's relevant to us, we stop paying attention. We're in fact negatively curious about it. At the same time, you don't want to start with something so basic where somebody feels like they already know the answer, because if they already know the answer, they're not curious to know more. So this little phrase of, they often want to know, serves an important role, because what it does is it engages the curiosity of the person that you're speaking to, again, whether it's written or spoken, because they are then going to say, well, I have that question. What's the answer? And so that's going to set you up for the this next pieces here. So the next piece here is just kind of really validate that question. So you're saying, hey, these people that I'm talking to ask this question so they can. And this is one of those places where kind of in classic sales and marketing training, right, we talk about painting a vision for the future. We talk about articulating, what is that goal achieved? Why are they asking for this question? What is the big problem that they're trying to solve, that they know they're trying to solve? What's the big goal that they're trying to achieve? What is the big need that they're trying to meet that maybe they haven't met it yet? So what you're looking for when you fill in this one, so they can, is what does this question what does answering this question help your audience achieve? So you're really looking for that thing that they don't have yet. And this can be kind of a bigger scale than the question you were talking about originally. For your sure, that's produced better patient outcomes. So they want to know how how to keep people on critical medications longer so they can improve patient outcomes. And so you're looking for something like that, where those two pieces are in play. Now, this piece, is it necessary? No, but it can help as you are figuring out particularly longer pieces of content. What are some of the things that are really driving people to be engaged and potentially interested in your message, your product, your service, your company, your idea? So just including that can help to cement and make someone feel confident that A, you have an answer to their question, and B, that you really get them, because you understand not only that they have this question, but you also understand one of the reasons they're asking it. Now, once you've got that, then what you're trying to do is to say, okay, how do we establish something else? Because once we've established that curiosity for people, we need to establish the contrast between where their current focus for answers lies and where your focus goes. So that's why the next blank here is, when looking for that answer, they often focus on. So here's the thing. Your audiences are smart, capable, and good. You may not always believe that. They may not always believe it of themselves. But one of the basic human drivers is to be seen as smart, capable, and good. And so the more that you can build that into your messages, the more effective they're going to be. Now, I bring that up because smart, capable, and good people who have questions they haven't answered yet are probably trying to find the answer. And they're not dumb, right? They're not wrong, but there's a reason why they haven't answered that question yet. And, I talk about this a lot more in my book, but what is behind this is not so much what they're doing, it's how they're seeing. It's where they're looking for that answer, the lens that they're using. So it's kind of like, if you've ever been underneath one of those street lamps that's kind of orange, and you realize that it kind of takes all the other color out, and anything that is kind of orange suddenly disappears. That's kind of their experience right now, is that they're looking through looking at the world through a lens that's kind of eliminating certain avenues for answering that question for them. And so what you want to do is kind of show them that. You're like, hey, you know what? You're standing under this yellow light might mean that you're not able to see some yellow stuff. Let's go look at this light and see what else shows up. So what you're looking for here is their current perspective. Now, I have put on the screen one of my favorite examples. I want this to be your mascot for these two blanks on the conversational case. Because if you look at this closely, when you first saw it, you probably saw one of two animals. And if you didn't realize there were two animals, the moment I just said there were two animals, your brain probably went and found the other one. So So Shark, I'm going to ask you when we do our Q&A, like which one you saw first. But based on my experience, most people tend to see, or many people tend to see the duck first. So this is a classic illusion from 1897 called the rabbit duck illusion. My experience, most people tend to see the duck first. Now, the duck, right, is how your audience is currently seeing their own situation, right? They're looking out there. They're looking for the answer to their question. They see a duck. They're like, there's a duck. I don't see any other options. All I see are ducks in front of me. But what you want to do is come in and say, there's another animal there. Oh, look, do you see the bunny? And then once you see the bunny, by the way, second animal, it's a bunny. That's when they can start to shift their perspective and see other alternatives. Now, notice something really important here. By really in that aspect of what are they focusing on now, we are saying, what's their current focus? What's their current duck? How are they looking at things right now? And by looking at that and calling it out, we're making sure that we're validating how they're looking at the world right now. So one thing we need to do is make sure that it's accurate and that they would agree with it. And second, that it doesn't make them wrong. Remember, people want to be seen as smart, capable, and good. So sometimes we come in, particularly with our marketing messages and sales messages, and say, hey, I know you've got this question and you're going about it all wrong. Now, that might work in the short term, but brain science supports that it does not work in the long term at all. And your own experience may show that as well. So we want to make sure that we kind of are reinforcing their current position in a certain way before we introduce a different perspective. So as an example, in the case of YourSure, the partners and providers they're talking to right now, when they're trying to keep people on critical medications longer, focus more on what patients recall about taking their medications than on, and we'll get to that in a minute, blood tests. But there's a good reason why they're focused more on what patients recall, because those tests that they can do as of not hearing it, before they've heard about YourSure, don't come back in time for it to be helpful when they're trying to keep people on medication. So they have to rely on what patients say they're doing, if patients say they're taking the medication or not. So once we've established that, you see how that's something they would agree with. They're like, yep, agree. We focus on what patients recall. We're not wrong for doing that. There's a good reason. Now's the opportunity to introduce the bunny. So you're saying you're focusing on this more than on. And here's where you're shifting and saying, here's another lens to look through. Here's another thing to see in the picture. Now, notice this is a new thing. Like if you saw the duck first, you didn't see the bunny right away. So it's new, but it's still consistent with what's already there. Notice you can go back and forth between seeing that duck and the bunny without my adding anything other than, hey, take a different perspective on this. There's no new lines, anything else. And really, this is what you're trying to do in your own messages. Say, hey, when looking for this answer, you're focused over here. We look through this lens instead. So for YourSure, that's saying, okay, we focus on the tests part. So what we're trying to do on that, please, again, remember, it's consistent with what they're looking for. There's like, yep, we agree, tests would be great, but we don't have them yet. Now, once you've done this, now it can start to introduce the true reasoning for your answer. You can say, yep, we can agree it's true. Now, what you're looking for here is a shared belief that exists before you call it out, or is one that would be readily agreeable. So again, shared, meaning they have this belief already or could easily have it, and you do too. Now, the second piece is really important because it needs to be, we can validate it without you. A lot of times when we make messages and sales messages, marketing message, we tend to say, hey, do this thing because the thing that you're doing right now is wrong, and this thing is much better. And that's all we do, essentially. We may put other words in it, but that's essentially the argument that we're making. Ours is better by ours. But we're not giving them anything when we do that. We're not giving them anything that they can test for themselves, where they can say, you know what, that's true. So what we're looking for is something where they can say, hey, since it's true that seeing is believing, right? You're anchoring on a shared belief. you're able to move from that to now they're going to understand when you introduce a test that produces visible results immediately, they're going to go, oh, that makes sense. Now I see why yours is better because it's based in something I already believe to be true. This is an important shift. One of the great places to start for those, by the way, are things like Proverbs and generally accepted truths in life. But there's lots of other places, and it can be a really fun thing to explore. Now, once you've done that, you know who you're talking to when we speak with, you know what they want to know, you know where their current focus is, the duck, where they could focus, your focus, bunny, the shared truth, right? Seeing is believing. Now you can introduce like, okay, here's the thing that we want you to do. Here's this shift in thinking or behavior. So once you're saying like, you've introduced all that, then you're saying, that's why our answer is, right? And here we are going to answer is, what's your recommended approach? What is the thing that you do? High level. Now, you of course can come in and say, well, this is what our product is, or this is what our service is. But I recommend that you figure out what is the idea that's behind that. What's the single shift in thinking or behavior that your idea, your product, your service, this concept that you're introducing in your content, your blog post, whatever, what is that single idea that it represents? And keep it pretty high level. Here's the thing. When people have one big question, like how do we keep people on critical medications longer? They want one big answer, not a 5-step process. They want to understand, if I have this question, here's the answer. Now, you're going to give them a 5-step process or whatever it might be, but really remember that when someone has one big question, they want one big answer. So when we're talking about this big question of how do we keep people on critical medications longer, the one big answer is make the invisible visible instantly, or in kind of explanatory terms, take the results that people can't feel, or the effects that people can't feel, and turn them into results that they can see, right? Because seeing is believing. See how this all fits together? Now, these next 3 are optional, but they can be helpful as you're planning a piece of content or planning a conversation. This next one is it also. So you're saying, hey, you know that question you have? Well, here's the big answer. I just gave it to you. But not only does that answer your question, it also does this other thing that you maybe didn't even think about before. So for instance, with YourSure, right? We were talking about, I'll come back to this free price thing in just a second. We're talking about, with YourSure, we're talking about, we can not only improve patient outcomes, but we can also empower patients and providers. This is a concept that, you know, our much beloved Greek god of marketing, Seth Godin, not Greek, whatever. He talks about this in terms of a free prize, which I love that terminology for. Because think about it this way. You have, your audience wants the cake and to eat it too, which you've done now. They want the cake. That's their question. You're going to allow them to eat it because you've given them an actual answer to their question. And this is like the cherry, the extra fluffy icing, the jimmies on top, right? This is the extra piece that they're going to get from having that. All right. Now, in order to figure that, it needs to be something that they would consider valuable. And so when we're talking about YourSure, again, it was that empowers patients and providers. Again, is that a necessary piece to include? No, but this can also oftentimes be a great place to park those things that you wish people wanted from your product or service or company, but they're not asking about yet. So you may know, right, that your product can help them, not only find what's in their risk blind spots, but also fund and fix them, to use an example from my client, Red Monocle. But they're not looking for that yet. Like, right now, they're just looking to find those blind spots. And once you give them an answer on how to do that, which Red Monocle does, then you can add. And oh, by the way, this same system allows you to, gives you what you need to fund them and to fix them as well. So once you've done all that, if there's an ask, you want to make sure that they understand how to put that change into play. So again, an optional one is, hey, you want to make the invisible visible instantly. Here's how we do that. This is what you're answering here is just how do you achieve that thing that you said your answer is. So what does that look like? What's the process? What are the components? What are the products or services? What's the steps that someone can take in order to get there? We're looking for here are things that are specific enough to make that high level concept concrete. So in the case of YourSure, it was a pretty simple answer. It was just simple urine test. That's what we're trying to do. That's how we get this done. So once you've done all that, now you can actually make the ask, which is, so would you consider, or as you can see on the worksheet, there's an option there. Would you be open-minded to? And in this case, this is what you're looking for. You're saying, what is the specific, realistic ask that you're asking of your audience? For YourSure, that was, would they be open to taking a demo or a pilot? And from there, that allows them to put it all together. Now, having done all that, now you've got all the pieces and parts. Think of these as you've established the ingredients and you've actually kind of made a starting version of a recipe. You've made a starting version of your message, of a piece of content. You've outlined potentially a conversation. You've outlined potentially a whole marketing platform, which is what some folks use this for. What can you do with it from there? Well, this goes back to the beginning, because once you've got all of those blanks filled in, you have what you need to answer that question. So what is it that you do? What is the big idea? What's this content going to be about? You're just going to take some of those pieces that you filled in. So this should look familiar, because when someone says to YourSure, what do you do? They say, we help people stay on critical medications longer. Oh, look at that. That's the answer to what people want to know. And through simple urine tests, that's the how that turn effects people can't feel into results they can see. That's a version of their approach, right? So by taking those pieces, you can combine them into a short, quick, powerful summary of what your idea is, what message you're trying to get across to people. Now, in those cases where you need to build more content around it, where it's a white paper or you're extending this conversation, that's when answering that, you would say, okay, that's what we do. All right. But why is that the answer? Well, that's then where you'd say, well, when we speak with patients, partners and providers, they often want to know, right? So they can, looking for that answer, they often focus on rather than on. Yet we could agree it's true that, which is why we, right? And that not only answers the question, it also, here's how we do that. So would you consider? So all of this, I go into detail on what that approach is in a book that's coming out 2 weeks, yay, called Find Your Red Thread. This conversational case is an easy way to find your red thread. And if you're wondering what the red thread is, it is the connection, the story that our brains build to make a question and an answer make sense. So when we're thinking about messages, that's exactly what your message is designed to do. No matter where somebody starts with your message, where you're trying to get them is someplace other than they are, mentally, physically, financially, right? No matter what you're trying to do, you're trying to say, you are here, you want to get there. Your message is the connection. People build that connection in their minds constantly. So the whole idea here is to build it for them in advance so that you can build a story that they'll tell themselves. The challenge, and what hopefully this worksheet can help you avoid, is that a lot of times we focus on what we want to say about our ideas more than on what they need. But people need to understand why they should care. They need to understand why what you're saying is true without you just saying, trust me. They need to understand all of these pieces. And the whole reason we're doing that is because humans are not rational decision makers. They're rationalizing decision makers. We tell ourselves stories to justify what we do. So I love the way that the mathematician Blaise Pascal puts this together. He says, the art of persuading is as much about that of agreeing as that of convincing. And really, that's what we're helping you do with this worksheet. We're helping you step by step go through where people would say, am I a part of that group? Yep. Do I have that question? Yes. Is that why I have that question? Yes. Would I agree that this is my current lens? Yes. Would I agree that this other lens is possible? Yes. Would I agree that this fact is true? Yes. So therefore, do I agree that this new behavior or action makes sense? Yes. When you're doing that, what you're doing is you're building that story that they're going to tell themselves anyway. So this is the answer to how is it that you can drive more action and get more engagement with your digital marketing. Script the story that people will tell themselves. And what you'll find is that not only tell themselves, but they'll also be better equipped to tell other people about your work as well. So with that, I'm going to wrap up and come back on over to Ken and Shark. I know we're on shark terms, right, Ken? I hope.
Well, we're not on. So tell me a little bit more about the book and the inspiration. I'm excited. It comes out May 18th.
17th. Yeah, it comes out May 17th.
Right.
So, as I said before, this whole idea that we constantly tell ourselves stories to justify what we do. This is incredibly true of our audiences. We are constantly talking ourselves into, and more specifically out of, why we should do anything different. And since our brains are doing that anyway, one of the most powerful things that you can do for your messages is to put them into the structure of that story. Because without that connection between question and answer, between problem and solution, a thing that the Northern Europeans call the red thread, things don't make sense and we won't act on them. They won't pass that kind of gut check, and they won't pass that, all right, I need to make this case to my colleague or my boss. But this doesn't actually make sense now that I think about it. So the inspiration for the book was really just to make sure that people had a way of building that story that people will tell themselves.
And a reminder, if anybody wants to ask a question, Tamsen's going to be here for the next 4 hours answering all these questions. But if you see the question mark bubble on the left, please put in your question. We'll be sure to ask that of Tamsen as well. So again, reminder, you can take a lovely screenshot of Tamsen and me right now and post it with hashtag Digimarcon or Digimarcon at home. How's that for a nice weave in? But how do you do this? Yeah. How do you do this where you, mahalo, how do you do this really where you do this to scale though? This is something that I've thought about a lot of times when you talk about drawing that red thread through and keeping that message, and you zeroed in on fixing that problem for a customer. And I love that. But I always think about how we take this to scale.
Yeah. Well, for most of my clients, we start at scale. We start with what is it's the core story of the company. It's why you do what you do the way that you do it. And so typically when we're thinking in that at scale, rather than saying, okay, we're talking with, sales managers of organizations that are this size and above, generally when we're talking at scale, we're talking about much more about mindset of folks. We're saying, that category of people we're talking to are people who want, right? Like using the red monocle example, to anticipate risk. We're talking to chief information security officers who want to anticipate risk. That's a big high level question. And we're saying at a high level, what is the lens that people are using? And at a high level, what is the lens that we're using? And just keeping kind of going on through there. And then, like I said, that worksheet basically is the kind of the quick and dirty way to find a red thread. You can strengthen it from there. But once you have that core story, it becomes so much easier to adapt it to specific audiences, specific applications, specific use case scenarios. So the way to think about it is you establish this big kind of the big red thread, and then start to build those individual ones that tie to it. And it always follows the same process, because that is the structure of information that your brain is always looking for. So it always tends to be successful.
So I'll tell you what I was looking for. I saw the duck.
You saw the duck. Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of that Yanni or Laurel one too. It was,
definitely,
which one do you hear?
Yeah, exactly. But I love that example because it embodies so much of what is important when you're trying to create change through communications. It's really important not to make people feel wrong. So it's not, the duck is there. The duck is 100% there. So is the bunny. And really, that's what you're trying to say is like, hey, I get why you're looking at the world this way right now. I get why that happened. Do I have it right that this is why you're looking at it that way? So they can go, yeah. And when somebody feels validated that way, again, whether you're talking about an individual level or a market level, they're much more likely to because of the principle of reciprocity, they're much more likely to say, hey, you took the time to understand my perspective. So now tell me a little bit about yours. It just sets everything up much more, kind of much more elegantly for a conversation that can actually move somebody off of their kind of status quo behavior.
So, are you seeing anything? This is somebody asked me to ask you this before. Are you seeing anything during the pandemic that has changed or altered or emphasized, or I don't even know what adjective or adverb to put around it, but
Yeah.
how much more we need to align this? Because I think I may have mentioned to you that one of the books that I was working on that I started prior to the pandemic and then kind of put it on pause was really I don't want to say drawing a red thread because I don't want to, trademark infringement with with yours. But I was really thinking through this, and then I
Yep.
saw this myself really becoming even more difficult for marketers to try to draw that line because of all the other noise that was going on over the
Yeah.
last 12 months.
Yeah. I mean, I think the pandemic to me showed, I mean, the way that I'm wired, it reinforced for me um, why it's so important to take this kind of approach, which the communications researchers would call it, it's the difference between what's known as sender oriented communication, which is let me tell you about my situation and what's important to me, which is
Hmm.
what I want to talk, and versus receiver centered oriented, meaning how is this being heard, how is it being interpreted, how what's going to happen. But if you think about the true nature of communication, like communication requires something to be received, right, and understood in order for that communication to have been successful. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to drive action. But if we don't ever think about the other half of that, half of what we're putting out there, we're guaranteed for it not to be successful. And so I would say one of the things you've seen the most in the pandemic, and I would say also in the political environment, and this is true of both sides, by the way, let me make that perfectly clear, is that there's been such incredible polarization and unwillingness to see why someone might
Really?
hold an opposite position. I know
Yeah.
Kenneth is like, huh? That I think that it's a really important path to doing to that. Is it like the answer? No, but is it a way to start practicing? Well, just even at the level of like, well, why would someone who's not a customer of ours right now, what would be their case for becoming our customer, not our case? Like, what, your case for why your
Mhm.
stuff is awesome. Why would they think your stuff is awesome? And then it brings up an important point. There will be certain people, certain parts of the population that, whether we're talking about, pandemic messages or whether we're talking about digital marketing messages, that just simply are not going to be your audience. And that's where that shared belief piece comes into play. Because if your whole approach to, let's say, how you solve problems is based on like the golden rule, and there's a subset of people out there that's like, every person for themselves, I don't care what you think, like, not going to happen. Like, yes,
Mhm.
of course your product or service could help them, but would they ever truly engage with it? Probably not. And
Mhm.
why would you spend that, your time and effort on trying to like instill a new belief in someone, when just over and over again, what I've seen, my experience shows, is that it's much more easy to activate an existing belief than to try to change someone's belief. And that's, I think, really the key to all sorts of things in our
Well,
current state.
from a digital marketing perspective, then, because we could talk about politics for a while, but just so we don't alienate half the crowd, whichever half that is, from a digital marketing standpoint, where do you see marketers really doing this the most with not aligning that messaging with pulling that red thread through? Is it necessarily on a channel basis, or is there? I'm trying to equate it to something in my mind. Is that you see it most of the time with Facebook, but not with the paid advertising or
No,
vice
no.
versa?
I'd say where the biggest problems happen actually is in the short in the short post, right? Like because what happens is when we don't have a lot of room, right? Where we're trying to do like a headline for something or whatever, like, I get it. Like, the tendency is to lead with what's different or remarkable or whatever. But one of the things that I often say to my clients is, difference may get attention, but relevance keeps it. And so what I see people doing sometimes is just saying, now more than ever, it's time to pay attention. And it's like, okay, like if that's the sum total of the ad, I am probably not going to pay attention to it because I don't understand what it does for me. Mm-hmm. So I would say that this is true, particularly in short form, paid advertising and those kinds of things, where we tend to say, here's the solution. And we don't actually focus on, here's the problem. Here's the problem that you have. Here's our unexpected answer to it. So one of the refrains that I often say is like, you need in every piece of communication, even if it's a short, you need to combine something that's desired with something that's different, something that people want via a means they don't expect. And so it's kind of the same thing. I do a lot of work with thought leaders, like speakers and authors, and it's kind of the same issue that happens when, someone has, 10 minutes, let's say, in a TED style talk to get an idea across versus 60. And it's kind of the classic writing thing too. I mean, it's been attributed to a whole bunch of people, but said, sorry, I wrote you a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short one, right? That kind of equivalent. I see less of a problem with not making a full case in longer content because eventually we get around to giving people all the information that they probably need. But it's the short form content that we have to be super careful about. The trick is, the tendency is that we tend to write the short piece first. Oh, yeah. But what you could see from what we're talking about today is like, no, first you have to get all the ingredients on the table, then you have to make the sauce, then you reduce it. Because otherwise it's like trying to blow up like a little thumbnail image. Like it may look awesome small, but when you try to bring it to scale, it just simply doesn't have enough data in it. There isn't enough information for it to survive at scale. So yeah, it's the short. Beware the short.
It's almost like when you tweak the ad copy after you've created the ad, the visual ad, if you will. But I'm curious, where do you see the levels that this gets I'm going to mess this question up, that it gets confused at? Is it at the top most of the time, or is it mid-level or bottom? Because this is almost one of the things the thing that I love about your presentation is I think that even a junior marketer can take this messaging, because a lot of times they're the ones actually creating the content, doing the marketing. They can take the message and tweak it in their own words, in their own voice.
Yes.
Give people like copywriters, for example, or just content creators, a massive voice in being able to align the messaging. As long as you follow what their strategy is, you can still put it in a voice. Because again, the customer doesn't care about the sausage making process and who writes it or what it. Right. They just want an aligned statement that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's a lot of the work that I do with clients. We find that core version, right? But I mean, anybody who is in the practice, as all your viewers, audience members are, of the practice of having to generate this content day in, day out, there's a lot of stuff that breaks, and I get it. I mean, I worked for brand strategy firms. Mm-hmm. I've been in organizations that have hired them, and there's such a huge yawning gap between like a beautifully crafted tagline, a position statement, and graphic identity, and the churn of having to get content out there every day. And to me, messaging is that connection. It's that connection between, all right, we have this big idea that we're trying to get out there. How do we actually make it work day to day? And that's where a process like this can be helpful, because it allows you to say at the top, like, so when I'm working, I usually start with the executive team. I was like, okay, what's the core story that you're trying to get out there? What's the core red thread that we're trying to get out there? And then what we do is we work with the individual kind of content teams, marketing teams, sales teams, et cetera, to say, okay, this is the core story. Given your application, how would you fill this in? So that you get a consistent message, but yet still one that's customized to the speaker or the writer, the audience, the application, the stage of the customer journey. And it really is designed to be flexible, because that was a thing that, particularly when I was working as the content digital strategist for an advertising agency for a number of years, that's the problem I needed to solve. I was like, well, okay, I know what the strategist told us the brand is, or what the company has told us the brand is, and yet we got to generate content like 3 times a day. Like, how do we do that? where is that going to come from? We needed something that had more body to it, more pieces to draw from.
Yeah, and it's such a good point though about writing the content ahead of time, or writing whatever the solution is. Just in practical terms, you're writing all this stuff without drawing a line for through it, getting it ready, and then use some sort of platform to post it out, regardless of when the question's being asked by the consumer or not.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
from a practical standpoint, I think about this a lot with ads, and drawing that red thread, if you will, through is, a lot of times we write stuff or create stuff or put it on ads somewhere. The customer sees it. And if it's any kind of complex sale, they've got to go through the pipeline and probably talk to a human on the other end of that brand. Not
Yep.
even if we can do some of it obviously in e-commerce and conversion rate optimization, you can fix those tweaks. But literally, when you listen to calls, I listen to calls on occasion through Invoca's platform, and somebody saw an ad here. They get to the call center and it's rubber baby buggy bumper, and they don't understand that thread,
Yeah.
that the consumer is not going to stitch this thing together for you. This is
Right.
they see something and you haven't answered it correctly. And if those don't align, it can really be a mess, especially when you consider all the teams that we work together with now, with third parties, with internal teams that may be fragmented. And then there's some poor schmo at a call center 1,000 miles away who's just trying to answer, just trying to help make that sale for you.
That's right. And you can't have a conversation with a tagline. Like that can't be
Yeah,
it. Like
exactly.
you need more than that, right? Like
Yeah.
you absolutely need more than that. And so I mean the thing is that when you have that, you know, when you have that ability to be both consistent and customized, you're able to really just make sure that even if you're talking just like pieces of parts, because you can even look at each of those gray squares on that worksheet as a place to spend more time. So I do work with companies who use this as a basis of sales messaging. And it's called the conversational case for a reason, because each of those gray blocks is a place for you to extend the conversation. You don't just have to like say, hey, here's the thing I need to tell you. It's like, hey, when we talk with folks like you, they have this question. Is that question, how would you like, is that your experience as well? And a
Mhm.
lot of times when they're asking that, they have this, like, what are you seeing? How does that work? We see people who focus this place. And even if it's written content, and same thing, there's a place there to extend out or to atomize and say, all right, we're looking for things to post about. What are all the different ways that people ask that question? Okay,
Mhm.
let's write a piece of content on all of those different pieces, right? What
Mhm.
are all the different ways that, all the different kind of shared beliefs that we have? Okay, how can we turn those into pieces of content? And ultimately, it all does come back in together. Because here's the thing, like, again, branding and positioning, incredibly important, but they are fundamentally sender oriented pieces. And so what the red thread does is kind of puts the other half in that and says, okay, we know what we want to stand for. And here's how that connects to the people that we most want to serve. And that's a critical connection, because if you don't know what that connection is, there is no way your customers are going to know what it is either.
Exactly. Well, Tamsin, you're awesome. Thank you so much for today. Looking forward to reading the book soon. Where do people find you?
All things Tamsen, you can just go to redthreadbook.com and that'll get you onto my website and you can explore from there.
Perfect. Tamsin, tell Tom we said hello as
I
well.
will.
And thank you so much and have a great day.
Thanks so much.